And then in the same way, it's like these kids aren't stupid. Like, they'll see an orchestra coming in to do a group project with them, and they'll see this, like, sea of white faces of, like, 80 or so white people, and then they'll see the one half black person at the front saying, oh, this is our project, and look what you can achieve. And they'll go, well, they've deliberately put that person there because they're trying to look like there is no systematic or systemic racism issue within orchestras. So there clearly is. Like, it's a lot more transparent than I think they realise.
Hello and welcome to The Other Box. This is episode 2 of the show where I, Lizzy Gür, chat to people who have interesting things to say and I try and understand them a little better. In this episode I speak to another really close friend of mine who is a percussionist studying at the Royal Northern College of Music. She was principal of her section with the National Youth Orchestra in 2019. She's played at Clarence House, at the Proms, and she's even performed alongside Stormzy, which is pretty cool. It's Simone, and she has some incredibly insightful things to say about what it means to be a black female percussionist in such an elite space. So listen closely. I learned a hell of a lot. So I just really hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for listening. Okay, hello. Long time no speak.
It's been way too long.
I'm super excited to get into stuff today. There aren't very many high-profile black female percussionists at all, so I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about kind of how you broke into the field and what that was like for you.
So I was going to start violin lessons in primary school, and my parents were like, nah, that's lame, you should do drum kit. So I started drum kit lessons. I didn't mean to become a percussionist. I was going to do piano, and I started at like a junior conservatoire doing piano and then just like percussion on the side because you had to choose like a separate instrument as well. And then I preferred the community aspect of percussion a lot more than piano, and so that kind of became my main focus. So it all kind of happened quite organically. It's a strange one, realising that you're kind of very much the only person who looks like you within like every circle within your career. It's a strange thing because you forget, and then certain things remind you, and it's like, oh.
What kind of things would it be that would remind you of the fact that you were kind of a bit different?
Just there's a crossover between it being class things and race things, because in general, kind of orchestral percussion, which is what I do mostly, it's orchestral music in general is very elite. It's a lot more, generally it'll be filled with people who have a bit more money, and I'm very much from like a working class background. It's hard to think of one specific thing, but it all kind of
it's hard to pick out
together.
It just all kind of contributes to an overall
like you'll hear general kind of just like the occasional joke about, oh, Africa this, Africa that, just like as a joke, and you forget, and you're like, oh, you see me as very different to you. And it's more kind of on the down low. It's never like a very in your face, like you're not the same.
Overt. How did that kind of affect your experience then wanting to be a percussionist? Because I know you said you kind of just organically chose it over piano because there was a kind of community aspect to it. But alongside that community aspect came that feeling of almost alienation and feeling kind of slightly outside of the group. So how did those two things kind of coexist?
I think it's been quite difficult. I feel like I've had quite a lot of kind of imposter syndrome, like feeling like in general like I don't deserve to be there, or I'm not good enough, or everyone else is better, which isn't true. Sometimes it gets demotivating when you're in a situation where it's like, well, I'm in orchestral percussion as a career because I've joined all these like youth ensembles and things like the MYO and things like that, where you just get in based on merit, but realising that if I was to pursue it as a career, the majority, like 99.9% of orchestras would be people who were completely different for me. It would be kind of richer, kind of generally white, upper class males. And that's kind of like, it's like I don't want to quit because it's like, well, it's my passion, it's what I really enjoy doing. But at the same time, it's like, well, would those people really want me in an orchestra? It's like, do I want to put, I don't know, it's kind of, sometimes it gets a bit like I just kind of want to not do orchestral, kind of pursue more kind of quote unquote black kind of avenues, which is then it's like it's playing into like stereotypes.
It's a difficult one because on the one hand, like you say, it's playing into that idea that classical music isn't for you, isn't for black people, isn't for working class people, but at the same time it's difficult being that person that kind of paves the way almost, isn't it? There's a lot of kind of responsibility and like a lot of difficulty that comes with that sometimes outweighs, I guess, the joys of the experience.
Exactly. I had a conversation with somebody where I was just talking about it. I was looking at the websites of every like well-known orchestra in the UK, and there's one female. There's not a single black female. And someone was like, "Well, just be the first." And I was like, "Well, I don't want to be the first. I don't have.
That's just an easy thing to do."
Yeah, it's like I don't have the mental energy to have to be the first in anything. And the first person is generally the person who they face a lot of backlash because people don't really want them to be there. And it's like, I just want to kind of live my life and do what I enjoy doing. It's like it feels like this unnecessary weight to have to kind of be like some kind of front runner, or try and like prove something. And it's like it's a dilemma between kind of like I should do that because it needs to happen at some point, like someone needs to be that person, but also I don't want to be that person. I just want to do music, you know.
That's totally understandable. And I think it's very easy for white people, you know, people who are never going to face those kind of obstacles doing what they want to do, to just say, well, you know, you can be the first, and you can be the, isn't it exciting, you can be the hero. But there's so much, I guess, just baggage that comes with taking on that role. How much do you think representation kind of plays a part in that then? Because obviously I mean I was going to ask you who did you have to look up to when you were kind of starting out, but I guess there's not really anybody.
No, that's the thing. It's a hard one to think about because I've never had any kind of role models to look up to per se, and it's difficult to know whether that would have made a difference had there been one, had there been kind of another like non-white person who was doing the same things that I want to do. I mean, I'm not saying that there's zero, like I've done concerts with the Chineke Orchestra, which is like an all ethnic minority orchestra, and I've met some wonderful percussionists who are black or biracial, or but I didn't know of them at the time, and they're few and far between. I think it would have been good to have somebody to go, okay, well, they've managed to achieve that, they're in the same situation as me, and they've managed to get to where I want to be. And maybe not having that is kind of part of the reason why it kind of just feels like you're just floating in your own kind of bubble. Like you don't really have you don't have any idea of, like, I don't know what I really want to achieve or what I can achieve, or I don't know, it's a strange one.
I recently read a piece by Nafisa Bakar, and it's called On the Representation of Muslims, and she condemns the kind of representation that we're seeing at the moment, saying that it kind of relies on the short-term labour of minorities, which is how she phrases it, but it doesn't actually address any of the underlying issues that are causing that lack of representation in the first place. And so you get a lot of kind of, you know, imagery of diversity, and you get a lot of kind of black people on the posters and things like that, but there's still only 1-2 black people in the orchestra of, you know, 100 odd or whatever. And it reminded me a lot of conversations that we've had about your experience, especially in but maybe also in other orchestras. You know, talk to me a little bit about that. How do you feel about that?
I agree. It feels like it must be difficult for organisations who, just in general, they haven't had an influx of ethnic minority or non-white people joining, whether that be down to lack of funding, education, or whatever the reason might be. It must be difficult for them to find a way to kind of fix that problem. But I find that a lot of situations that I've been in with organisations, it's very much been them trying to show everyone outside of the organisation that, look, we've got this non-white person, we've got this black person, and we've got an Asian person, and it's like that's kind of manifested in me always ending up on like the posters for concerts and like interviews. I've had an interview where I was told specifically to talk about how diverse the orchestra was, whilst being one of, I think, 2, maybe 3 black people. And myself, I'm not even being completely black, like being half white. Maybe that proximity to whiteness was the only reason why I was the one on the poster and not the completely black person. Sometimes I understand where they're coming from, and so it feels wrong to kind of stamp your feet and be like, this feels like I'm being
like a token
objectified
kind of
in a way. It's like seen as like, yeah, exactly. It does feel like over time it wears you down. It feels like you're kind of being used. And then at the same time you'll have people who don't quite understand like how that feels, just making jokes about it, like, oh yeah, you always get to be on the posters, you always get all these opportunities. And it's like, well, those opportunities aren't for me, it's for the organisation to look better. And it's kind of like, where do I gain anything from this? So yeah, it still feels like overall any ethnic minorities are still coming out at the bottom, and it doesn't benefit them.
Do you think that their public message of inclusion and diversity, as you said, does that reflect your experience in the or?
Oh, it's hard to say for sure. I never faced any outright kind of racism or anything as a member of I loved my time in I loved all the people there. I made so many good friends there. Everybody was really nice. At the same time, it still felt like I was intruding on a white space.
Right.
It felt like this is a white people's activity, and you're kind of separate. And when you are integrated, it's so that they can use you for promotions. And I'm sure it wasn't ever meant that way. And I think they were very much trying their best to kind of address the issue of like lack of representation. But for whatever reason, it very much felt quite alienating.
Yeah. And it's difficult, I guess, from your end as well to, as you say, kind of say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this shoot. I don't want to do this interview or anything like that. Because on the one hand, you're kind of contributing to a positive change, aren't you? Like, as you said, there wasn't anybody when you were growing up that was that person that you're being now, and so now you have a chance to be that person, but it's not really happening on your terms. It's still happening on the terms of the white people who are running the organisation and running the promotions, and so it is this kind of weird grey area, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. And also there's just the fact that it's very on the low key. Like you can't really pinpoint a certain thing and say this is a microaggression. Right. This had ill intent, or it's never something where you feel like it's your place to say this is out of order. You shouldn't be making me do this. It feels like you can't really complain. And on top of that, like you said, it is something that's needed in a kind of twisted way. Like you still need that representation. I've had doing outreach projects, and there's been black kids saying, oh my gosh, we saw you on the poster, like it was really cool. We saw you on the promotional material and things like that. And it's like, maybe that made a slight difference to them. Maybe that in that small way that will have changed their trajectory or what they wanted to do. So who am I to kind of like say no to that just because it makes me feel a bit uncomfy, you know?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a dilemma of like, do I kind of choose to play this part in this big systemic thing, or are my feelings kind of, you know, valuable and important enough to go against
it feels like it has to be like a big statement, like, oh well, it's my duty to kind of pass kind of this on, like this, oh look, I've managed to do whatever I'm doing. But then at the same time it's like, well, I'm literally just one of them kids at the same time, like, and it's like, am I being used? If this was happening to one of the younger people that I wanted to inspire, I'd probably be saying, don't let them do that. It's like, it's just this whole system, like it's a cycle. So it's trying to choose between doing it for the greater good, I guess, or saying, no, this is part of a wider issue that you need to address, because I shouldn't have to be bearing the weight of inclusivity aged 15 or whatever I was.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So if representation isn't the entire answer, what can orchestras and organisations in general do to diversify kind of these corners of the orchestra, especially percussion? Because I feel like there are certain parts of the orchestra that are particularly male dominated and particularly white and particularly elite, and I feel like percussion might be one of those that's very, very male and very white. So I mean, what can we do then if it's not just about representation in the media? What is it that we can do better?
Oh gosh,
that's a really tough question. Again, I'm putting all of this responsibility on you, but I just want to hear your opinions, so don't worry.
I think it should start younger. We'd have projects where we'd visit secondary schools, and they were all about the same age that we were, and they'd be saying things like, look, all you need to do to get where these people are is practice and work hard. And they're looking at us like, no, we don't, because you've all come from middle class, upper class backgrounds, you've all had a good start in life. How are we supposed to, and we're the same age as you, like, you've already made it, we haven't. It's very patronising in a way.
Yes.
And I just think if you took that same energy of look what you could do, look what can be achieved, and brought that to younger children in primary schools, I think that would have so much more of an impact. Because growing up, I don't think I ever had any kind of, at my primary school at least, there was never any kind of like, oh look, this is an orchestra, this is what the different instruments do. And just to think like, we had all sorts of people come in, we had like policemen, and at the end of the meeting at the assembly, there was kids leaving going, oh my god, I want to be a policeman. And it's like, if they'd had an assembly with like, oh, here's an orchestra, here's a youth orchestra, it's kids, and it's just kind of like, well, this is open to you, like you're allowed to do this. This isn't something that's like closed off, or it's like a white space. I think at the end of the day, it always boils down to, oh, this organisation doesn't have enough people of colour. And then people saying, well, yeah, but no one applied. There was no people of colour applying. It's like, why is that? There's no attempt to take these kids and say, look, this is what you can aspire to be.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to happen. And then in the same way, it's like these kids aren't stupid. Like they'll see an orchestra coming in to do a group project with them, and they'll see this like sea of white faces of like 80 or so white people, and then they'll see the one half black person at the front saying, oh, this is our project and look what you can achieve. And they'll go, well, they've deliberately put that person there because they're trying to look like there is no systematic or systemic racism issue within orchestras. So there clearly is. Like we can see, like it's a lot more transparent than I think they realise.
So you've had some really kind of incredible musical experiences, really. You know, you've been to Trinidad, you've played for the royal family, like you've played at the BBC Proms. How does it feel when your experience and talent is kind of minimised to a ticking box exercise? You know, so many people will kind of say, yeah, you know, that's great, you did it, but like you're the black person, so of course you were asked to do it, kind of thing, rather than you're the best person at what you do in this orchestra and that's why you were asked to do it.
It is probably the most infuriating aspect of like all of this, because you've got to bear in mind that in the first place, like in general, people of colour, there's like this phrase where it's like, well, if you want to get half of what this white person is getting, you have to work twice as hard. And so the effort that it takes to get to the point where like audition panels or whatever see like your merit, like see the talent, and it, like actually give you opportunities, is like, it feels like you have to work so much harder. And then once you get there, it's like, oh well, there's just so many jokes cracked about, oh well, it's only because you're black, like oh it's just because they want you for the posters, it's just for promotion, it's to make them look good. And it's like, well, if it was to make them look good, why am I one of only two black people in this orchestra? It's like, but then at the same time, when you hear it so many times, just kind of offhanded comments about it, it makes you believe it. Like, how do I know that it wasn't just because I was black, or just because they wanted to tick a box. It's so many different layers to every, like, navigating, like, your success and, like, things that you've achieved. There's so many different layers to it which just wouldn't be there if I was just a white person or a white male. Not that it's not difficult, or that white males don't have to work hard to get where they are, because of course they do, but there's just this added othering that makes it so much harder to kind of navigate, like, how you feel about how hard you've worked or what you deserve, or I don't know if that was coherent, but
No, absolutely, and it speaks so much to, again, how much extra effort you have to put in and how much motivation it takes to keep kind of pushing yourself into those spaces, which you essentially have to do. As you say, it's not like we're in a place where overt racism is as accepted as it was, though of course there are still incidents of that as well, but that doesn't get rid of these massive systems that are still in place that make it feel like you're kind of less than or inferior or just don't belong there or kind of intruding.
It's all such small, tiny details, but then when you add it up over, like, the course of someone's, like, trajectory as, like, as a training musician, it's just like constantly hammering at you that it's like, well, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing. You should be doing pop music or rap music or something that's more urban, or and then you'll have people saying, well, it's not that bad, like, you've still managed to get to the same place that we are. And it's like, well, but at what cost? Like, it should be as easy for everybody. I don't know how we get to that point, but that's what needs to happen.
Being a woman in percussion is also quite a big kind of obstacle, I guess. And I was just wondering, I guess, like, you know, how do you deal with the lad culture that comes with being in a percussion section? I mean, percussion isn't the only place that you get it in an orchestra, but I think it's definitely one of those super male-dominated corners.
It's a strange one, that, because I like a lot of the aspects of that culture. I like going out to the pub and having a drink after a gig. I like that environment, which is frustrating, because what actually ends up happening is that you realise that them people don't want you there. Like, they don't want you in that space. So it's a tricky one to navigate, where it's like, well, if I was to make it and be in an orchestra with this lad culture or whatever, I'd enjoy the whole, like, the camaraderie and all of that, but they wouldn't want me to be there. There's a lot more women now. There's a lot more girls studying percussion that I've encountered, like, people younger than me, and that there's a few people that I knew of growing up that were female. Like, the head of department at my university right now, Simone, she's a brilliant female percussionist, and she's been a big inspiration to me growing up. But it's not where it needs to be. There is it should be a 50-50 split, and it's far from it. And I've had situations where they just assume that you're not as good. I've had things where there's been sections of 7 people, 5 boys, 2 girls, and we get to a rehearsal on the first day. The tutor, who's never heard any of us play, dishes out the parts, and the 2 girls get the 2 lowest down parts with absolutely nothing judging it, no audition or anything like that. And it realising that you're not seen as being as good, it's exhausting. It's like, well, how hard do I have to work to prove that I am? And if I was to stamp my feet and say, look, I'm good enough, then it's like, oh, you're a you know? You have to be really good and also really humble. And it's just not something that male percussionists really will ever have to experience.
Have you ever felt like you have to kind of sacrifice either being good and being at the top of your game for the camaraderie and the kind of the culture and the friendship group and everything, or vice versa?
All the time. It ties in with imposter syndrome, which I've faced a lot, just feeling like you're not good enough. And also, like you said, not being allowed to say, oh yeah, I'm really good at that, without it being like, oh, who does she think she is? It ends up being that a lot of the time I'll turn to, like, I'll be very self-deprecative as a joke. like, I'll minimise my own achievements. If someone says, oh, well done for that piece, I'll be like, oh, no, it was nothing. I messed up so much. Like, I can't just go, thanks. Because they'll be like, ooh, so you agree? You thought it was really good.
Yeah.
And then that's a cycle, because if you're constantly kind of feeling like you're not able to, like, acknowledge your achievements because you still want to fit in, and you don't want people to say, oh, well, she's up herself, you know? That makes them believe that you're even worse than you are, because you're constantly saying it, and they're like, well, why would we believe anything else? And then that in turn kind of impact how you feel about your own achievements, even just internally, because you're constantly saying, oh, it wasn't as good, you're downplaying everything, and then everyone else thinks it's true, and it's a cycle.
Yeah. What advice do you have for percussionists, especially kind of, you know, female percussionists from marginalised backgrounds who are starting out and who don't have anybody really to look up to right now? What advice do you have for them?
Oh,
I'm really putting you on the spot.
No, if I was to kind of give advice to myself, like, the one thing that I wished I would have done would be seek out people to be inspired by. So that's what I'd say. Like, it's easy to just see that it's dominated by men, like the industry, and just internalize that. But actively go out and seek people who look like you, people who come from the same place as you, just to show that you can make it. And obviously things will always be kind of stacked against you, but you shouldn't let that impact how you feel about how good you are, because regardless of whether other people looking on might make assumptions about how skilled you are based on how you look, or whether you're a girl or a boy, you still need to keep your own integrity and know how good you are, and that you deserve to be there. You should never let other people's opinions of you determine your own self-worth.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciated that. And actually I learned a lot. I mean, we've been friends for a very, very long time, and we've talked extensively about this stuff, but I still feel like every time we talk about this that I kind of just get a new insight into how talented you are and how kind of hard you work, and I just think you're amazing. So thank you.
You too. Thank you for having me on.